Hi everyone, and welcome back to video number 11, which is going to be an in-depth look in the various ways of defending yourself in the Fiery Void game. So we'll have a quick look, just a quick refresh of the basic defensive options that are available to you, and then we're going to go through some more sort of bespoke systems available to certain races in the game. Okay, so starting with the basics, everybody hopefully by now should know that one of the main ways of defending yourself, and you'll see I've just set up a quick game here with some demonstration ships and an enemy over there, but the basic way of defending yourself is through defensive EW. So this ship hasn't set any, but for every point of defensive EW you have a 5% less chance of being hit by enemy fire. So that's where you start. The next thing you want to look at is the profile of your ship. So all ships have them. If you see in the defense category in the tooltip, so front and side is what the F and S stand for. So from the 60 degrees from the front, and indeed the rear, that's what the first number is, so it's 90 in this case, and then from the 120 degrees at either side is 80. So you can see that this Lucara here has a 10% lower profile from the side, so when it is taking incoming fire, if that's coming in at the side arcs, it's going to be 10% harder to hit. And so always have a look at your ship's profiles, because if you've got a much lower profile, you can see the fighters there, they're exactly the same, so it doesn't matter. But the Omega has a smaller front profile than it does at the side. But just always be aware, and you know, in the movement phase, you probably have a good idea of who your enemy is targeting based on their offensive EW, and you can move accordingly. Although the challenge is always to make sure that your own weapons are still in arc. But it can be a good way of getting those hit chances down and making the enemy miss a few vital shots. Okay, and the third, sort of in the basic defensive refresh, is just intercept fire, of course. So this is of weapons that can fire defensively will have an intercept rating. You can see it's -10 here. So if you don't fire these weapons offensively, if you don't attack anyone with them, then the weapons which have a 1-turn recharge will automatically try and intercept incoming fire, providing that it is interceptable. So for the quad array here, actually, I mean, it's got 4 guns and they all do -10 each. So it has potentially 4 shots that it can use to intercept fire. But do remember that the more intercepting shots you have against something incoming, it degrades for each additional intercepting shot, each additional defensive shot after the first one. So the first one would do the full -10 here. After that, it take 5% off the second shot, so it would do -5 for a total of -15. And then after that, you take -5 again, and actually it would be 0, so it wouldn't further reduce the chances of that incoming shot hitting you. But if you know, this game will automatically work this out, and effectively it will fire two of your shots for an overall intercept rating of -15. If you look at other systems here, so like the Earth Alliance Interceptor, which we'll talk a bit more about later, has an intercept rating of -20. So the first one would intercept for -20, the second one -15, the third one, if possible, would intercept for -10. So 3 of them together would be what, -45 in total against one single incoming shot. So very, very strong. But like I say, we'll come back to the Interceptor later on in the video. And don't, of course, forget jinking. So these fighters aren't jinking, but at the end of a fighter's move, it can use any spare thrust to wiggle about, I suppose, and try and dodge fire that way. And that is another way of keeping your fighters safe. Can be quite effective. And the first more exotic system of defense that I want to cover is shields. So shields in Babylon 5 don't generally operate in the way shields operate in, say, Star Trek, for example, where they can absorb a lot of fire without damaging the ship. Rather, the sort of shield technology in Babylon 5 Wars is a lot less advanced, and and has sort of two main functions, but we'll do that by sort of the Abbai, and the reason I chose them is because they have gravitic shields. And the two main functions that gravitic shields provide, and the White Star here as an EM shield, and for the purposes of game mechanics, EM and gravitic shields basically work in the same way. In lower, EM shields are more advanced, and I think there are possibly some special rules around EM weapons hitting EM shields, but basically they both do the same two things, and that is lower the chance to hit, lower the profile of your ship by the number specified on the shield. So, and that number is multiplied by 5. So, not immediately obvious. So let's go through a sort of pretend calculation for how that shield would work. Start with heavy laser. I want to shoot that. I've got a 62% chance to hit. And again, this should all be very familiar with you. So how do you get that 62% chance? Well, the Lacara has 90% chance to hit from the front. The heavy laser has an extra 15 fire control against capital ships like this one. And I've got one sensor lock, which gives me an extra 5. So without any defensive measures, I've got 110% chance to hit this Lacara. But there's a number of modifiers in play. The first, of course, is just range. It's 20 hexes away. The heavy laser suffers 1.65% per hex reduction. So 20 times 1.65, you got a 33% chance reduction just because of the distance between the two ships. So that would take you from 110 down to 77. But then that's when the shields come in. So you still got a 15% difference, and that's because 3 points of shield, and you'll notice here that the shields have specific arcs. I'll come back to that in a second. But is this Omega Destroyer in arc of any shields? It is. You can see that there. And at rating of 3, 3 times 5 is 15. So we go from the 77% chance that we should have down to 62. And that's how shields help your ship avoid fire. You're not going to avoid all the fire, so eventually the weapons will hit, and then shield's second main function come into play, and that is to actually reduce the amount of damage that is taken by the ship. So if this heavy works differently for different weapons, but is more effective against some. So for instance, if a heavy laser was to hit, it can do 24 to 60 damage total, and again from previous videos you know that will be separated into 10-point rakes. The shields only take 3 points off the total damage rolled. So before you divide it into the 10-point rakes, it'll take 3 points off, because again, you've got a shield rating of 3. It won't take 3 points off each individual rake. It's only over for lasers, and for raking damage in general, it's just the overall number. Heavy pulse cannon though, so it does damage 15 per pulse shot, and so say for instance, got a really good roll, I hit with 6 pulses, it would take 3, it would reduce the damage for each of those pulses, so each of those pulses would do 12 damage instead of the listed number 15. And so shields are, in this, in that case, much more effective at damage reduction against pulse weapons than they are against sort of raking weapons. And again, if I was to hit with a standard particle beam here, damage does 7 to 16, it would just lop 3 points off that. And in that way, it means that the Lacara here's not got a lot of hull, it's got quite low armor, but the shields make it's quite high profile. It's quite a large ship, but the shields make it a little smaller in profile, and means that it takes a little bit less damage. Shields also are quite effective against fighter fire, because generally, Cottas are a bad example because their guns are particularly poor, but damage 2 to 7, each one of those shots will be reduced by the shield value. So if that fighter's firing, then it's going to really, even if you rolled maximum damage of 7, take 3 off that, that's only 4 damage. the armor is going to absorb it. So shields really can add to the toughness of a vessel. The exception with the fighters there actually is like, well, does that make my fighters entirely useless? And the answer is no, because in terms of gravitic shields and EM shields, fighters can actually fly underneath them. So if a fighter was to enter into the same hex, has to be exactly the same hex as that ship, and fire at it, it would be in effect underneath the shields, and so it would not suffer from the reduction in profile or the reduction in damage for that ship. The last thing I just want to mention quickly on shields is some ships, not the White Star, or indeed the Drac actually, oh yeah, the Drac, I need to explain that, are powered by a shield generator. So from memory this tends to be Abbai or Brakiri ships, but that shield generator, it has a maximum number there. It can power 3 shields. So the Lakara actually has 6 potential shields, and they all have different arcs. So this adds a bit of micromanaging to shields in the initial orders phase. So under normal power it can power 3. You can, and you can see actually this Lakara had 10 spare power, you can actually add extra power to the shield generator to allow you to power up additional shields. So if I'd added 4 power to it, I could power up a 4th shield. If I added 5, if I added 4 and then additional 5, I could power 5. If I added 4, then 5, then 6, so 15 power in total. I could power all those shields on the Abbai vessel at the cost of quite a lot of power. So that's what the shield generator is, and that's how it works. And final, just quick mention on Drac shields. They have an absorption shield. My apologies. And it's slightly different. You can see it's special. It doesn't decrease the profile, so it doesn't do that. But on the other hand, it can't be flown under, so fighters can't fly underneath it and ignore it. But it is doubly effective against raking weapons, and that's just a sort of Drac speciality. So the absorption shield on Drac vessels, don't think that it works exactly like shields on Abbai or indeed EM shields on White Stars and possibly one day Vorlons. Okay, so that's shields. The next defensive system I want to talk about is the Minbari Jammer. So I've picked the White Star to demonstrate this one, but there you are. It's a standard system for most, if not all, Minbari vessels. But I picked the White Star because it had shields and the Jammer, so that was kind of a double whammy for this tutorial video. What you can see there is a few special rules, but essentially it denies a hostile offensive EW lock versus this ship. So generally speaking, as long as you have at least 1 point of EW targeting a ship, and in this case I have 1 point targeting every ship, you can see there, it means that your range penalty will be as listed. When you don't have an offensive lock on it, we know from previous tutorial videos that range penalty is doubled. What the Jammer essentially does is means that you can never, it doesn't matter how much EW you put to target this ship, you will never get, normal sensors will never get an offensive lock on it, and so your range penalties will in effect always be doubled, which you will still get, in this case, you've the benefit of the offensive EW, so +5 to hit here. If you put more offensive EW, if you put 4 points on, that would be +20 to hit. You still get that, but you don't get the lock, and so your range penalty is doubled, and that can make Minbari ships very hard to hit, particularly at range, and give them a strong advantage there, as indeed they had in the TV show. And in fact, if you remember, one of the pieces of story about the Minbari Earth War was that our ships could never get a lock on Minbaris, and so the Jammer is in the game to sort of represent that issue. Couple other things there. It doesn't work on its own faction, so Minbari Jammers don't work against other Minbari, and it's a powered system, so the player who's controlling the White Star can turn it off and on during the initial orders phase, and if it was off the previous turn, then it won't affect missiles that fall in turn. It also actually reduces, for ballistic weapons, it reduces the range that they can be fired in half. So Take ion torpedoes, for example, normally have a range of 50 hexes, so could pretty much hit anyone anywhere. We'd only have a range of 25 versus ships with an active Minbari Jammer. So again, massively makes Minbari very effective at range. So let's just do a quick bit of math to demonstrate how hard this is. So it was, get my heavy lasers back on, 62% to hit that ship, 7% to hit that ship, even though they're basically the same range and basically the same circumstances, where I've got 1 point of lock and they've gone full offensive. So let's break that down. We have a profile of 65 for the White Star. We have plus 10 because it's a medium ship for the heavy laser. So it's 75 plus the 1 point of EW and lock. So base chance of 80 to hit the White Star. But how do we get down to 7? Well, normal range penalty without a jammer would be 19 times 1.65, which off the top of my head is 31. So that would take you to 49% chance to hit. But we've mentioned shields already, so EM shields and arc. So that would go down to 39, which isn't great, but it's a heck of a lot better than 7. But as I say, with the jammer, your range penalty's doubled. So 31.3 something, I think, gets doubled and becomes 63% reduction for the same range, which takes your hit chance from 80 down to 17. And then the shields, negative 10, takes it down to 7. So you can see how effective the jammer is, in addition to it's a relatively smaller ship, sure, but shields, jammer, White Stars are incredibly hard to hit, basically, and it's for the reasons of the amount of defensive systems that they carry. But the Minbari aren't alone in wanting to defend their ships with specialised systems, so the next one to look at today is the Earth Alliance Interceptor system. So this is also a very effective defensive system. Works in a different way from the jammer though. So it does two things. One, it is actually a fast-firing defensive weapon. It can be fired offensively against fighters, for that matter, and it's pretty good at hitting them. But if you don't do that, it can also intercept incoming shots, providing they are interceptable, which is always a caveat. So when I say that, essentially I mean like lasers. In fact, all lasers are probably uninterceptable, and there's a few other weapons that are uninterceptable. Generally speaking, when I say if it can be intercepted, I mean lasers can't. But everything else that can be intercepted, that can do it, and you can see it's got an intercept rating of negative 20. So pretty good at intercepting in that way. But in addition to the sort of normal intercept fire rules, defensive fire rules, it also, if you look in the special box there, has an energy web system. And this is a system that's unique to Earth Alliance, although I think the Belt Alliance might have some sort of basic ones, but maybe not with the energy web system. So let's say it's more or less unique to Earth Alliance, and what it basically means is if the attacking ship is an arc of your interceptors, and you can see that the Omega has 6 interceptors with different arcs, then your profile is going to be 20% less. So for the Omega, it's got a front profile of 80. Actually, that's 60. And the tooltip unfortunately doesn't reflect this, but when I aim to target this vessel, we'll see that it does take into account. So 49% chance for that. Again, not terrible, but how did we get there? So 80% normal chance to hit from the front. We know we get 15 fire control from heavy lasers. We've got 1 lock, so that's another 5. So base hit of 100% on the Omega. Again, no modifiers, that would be an automatic hit for a laser. But we've got range, 19. We know that's negative 31%, so that should take us to 69%, which is nice. It's a nice hit chance. Unfortunately, these interceptors are an arc of the attacking vessel, and so you lop 20 off that one, and that's how you get your 49% hit chance for that. Okay, so Earth Alliance vessels, which tends to be massive bricks floating through space, let's face it, it should be easier to hit than they actually are if because they've got this energy web system that actually gives them some protection, makes them much harder to hit. I mentioned that the Omega has 6 interceptors. You only need 1 to be an arc of the attacking ship in order to get the energy web bonus. So what you will see quite a lot with Earth Alliance players is they might shut down, say, these 4 at the front and back, because from the 2 side ones you cover the entire strip and you can make sure that your energy web will be in effect for that turn at least. Once people start shooting off your interceptors, then you may have to turn more on, but you don't need them all on, and turning them off gives you like 2 power. So in the initial orders phase, quite often you'll see people turn quite a few of the interceptors off to put more power into the engines or sensors, all the usual places. But yeah, so that's the Earth Alliance interceptor system. Somewhat similarly, the Abbai, in addition to their shields, which are quite effective, and their quad arrays, which are also quite effective defensively, they also have a system called the Particle Impeder. Now this one is actually works differently in Fiery Void than how I think it worked in Tabletop. In Tabletop, I think you assigned electronic warfare from your scanner during the initial orders to prevent fire coming in, but it's not been possible to implement it that way in Fiery Void. So instead, it's power based. Now, which basically means it is a system that operates defensively only. It provides an intercept rating against incoming shots, and going back to what I was saying about uninterceptable weapons, Particle Impeder can actually intercept them. Very unusual in that regard. So that's one of its main bonuses. Provides an extra layer of defense thereby. So actually, that laser shot that I said was coming into the Lakara would have a 62% chance to hit. Well, that's not actually true, because the Particle Impeder, again, is an arc. And you'll notice with a lot of these defensive systems, they have arcs, and the attacker needs to be in them in order for it to take effect. That's, at the minute, it's not been charged up at all, so it's got an intercept rating of -15, which means that it would take an extra 15 off. So what would we go from 62, -15 down to 47? So that's the real chance of that laser hitting that, but that's something that would be worked out. So if you're fighting a Abbai, basically, you always need to bear in mind that these hit chances that you're seeing, they don't take into effect intercept fire, including particle impeders, and you might not have as good a chance to hit as you might think. Going to move on a little bit because I also want to show you like the other facet of the particle impeder in the initial orders phase, which is just sort of charging it up. So give me 1 second. Okay, and we're back, and we're in the initial orders phase this time. So a couple more things to show you, and then we'll wrap the video up. So particle impeder, I just want to show you that you can power it up. So you see in the special, can intercept, unintercept, we know that, can be boosted for increased intercept rating. So you can boost it 4 times, and it costs 2 power each time. No, 3 power, sorry, to boost it each time. So you can see 10, 1 boost, 2 boost, 3 boost. And each boost increases its intercept rating by 5%. So if you see it now, it says -30 and is glowing yellow to show that you've boosted it, whereas an unboosted one is -15. So 3 boosts goes from -15 to -30. And again, Abbai tend to have quite a lot of spare power because you can, if you're not using a quad array, turn it off, get an extra bit of power. And then you have -35, which is the maximum that the particle impeder can be boosted to. Equally, just to show you in practice, if you've got a bit of spare power, well, boost your shield generator, as I said, and then you can turn all of these on. But if you don't want to do that, and if you find that you've accidentally got 6 shields on, but my generator only powers 4, if I try and commit my orders, it says you can't do that. You need to turn off shields or boost your shield generator before you can commit this turn. Okay, sorry about that. And actually, just while on the subject of shields, the thing I forgot to mention was some fighters, again I think generally Abbai fighters, can also have shields. Works exactly the same way as capture ship shields, with the exception that fighters can't fly under other fighters' shields, so that rule doesn't apply. And indeed, if you look at special, you can see that that's noted there. Okay, so one last defensive, and it's a very unique one actually, in the sense that currently in the game, and I say currently, only the White Star has this system, but it's called Adaptive Armour. So fans of the TV show might remember one of the Vorlons and the White Star's advantages was that after someone had shot it, it would have the ability to adapt its armour and become a bit more resistant towards damage. And that's what Adaptive Armour tries to do in this game. I think what I'll do actually is just move things along. And we're back. Because you'll see things moved along, because the important thing I forgot is Adaptive Armour can't adapt to something if it hasn't been hit with it yet. So in order to show you fully how the system works, I had to have the Omega fire a little bit at the White Star and get him. So we're back, turn 3 now, initial orders phase, and let's see how Adaptive Armour works. Okay, so the icons here, this grey one, looks like a bit of a shield. And if you left click on it, you can see icons appear. So in the previous turn, I shot the White Star with particle weapon. And the Adaptive Armour can adapt to weapon types, not specific weapons, but weapon types. So if you go into hover over the different weapons, Interceptor, Heavy Pulse Cannon, Standard Particle Beam, you'll see the weapon type is all particle. So that's the genre of weapon, a category of weapon I suppose, that is considered by the Adaptive Armour. And if you adapt to, in this case, particle, and you do that by clicking on the plus, this probably okay, so that comes up, and then if we look on it, we can see the different weapon types. Particle, 1 for 1. The White Star's Adaptive Armour system isn't very strong, so it has 3 points to allocate, but can only allocate 1 point to each, and we'll get to the effect of that in a second. But by allocating 1 point to particle, that means that will reduce damage against all particle-based weapons by 1 point. Similarly to how shields reduce damage when they hit. So a standard particle beam hitting for 7 to 16 is going to take -1 off that, because the armour is adapted to particle. That would also apply to Heavy Pulse Cannon. Instead of 15 points per pulse, it would do 14. And the Interceptor, I mean that's against fighters, so that wouldn't work. What's interesting is the Adaptive Armour system will look at the enemy fleet and see what possible weapon types are in the enemy fleet, and only give you options of what's possible within a specific game. So, I mean, if you think about all the weapon types, there's matter, there's plasma, and we covered some of these in the previous video. There's lasers, there's particle, and so on. It's quite a long list, but the game doesn't give you that full list because you don't need that in the game. In this case, the Omega Destroyer only has particle weapons, laser weapons, and ramming. Ramming counts as a damage type. So that's what you get: ramming, laser, particle. Of those 3 types of damage, only particle weapons have hit the White Star, so the only point I can currently use is the one you saw me put into particle. And then if you just hover over the Adaptive Armour controller, you can see it doesn't use any power. I've allocated 1 out of 3 possible points. I've allocated it to particle, and then special, you can see that's just some instructions. Possibly a more concise description of what I'm giving you in this video. So, as I say, currently that system, it's a little more complex than the others, only exists in the White Star at present, but if future factions do end up using Adaptive Armour, then they'll use the same controller, and that's how you set it. It's, I mean, on the White Star, in addition to the shields, with that point in particle, then that means that these particle cannons are you know, if that shield's an arc, they're getting their damage reduced by 3, which, you know, if you hit him with multiple particle cannons or multiple pulses from a heavy pulse cannon, that damage reduction starts to add up, and is yet another reason why the White Star is maybe a lot more durable than it first appears. Okay, so I'm gonna wrap things up for this video here. Hopefully that was helpful, gives you a better understanding of different defensive systems that are in the game, and hopefully provides maybe an explanation if you're playing a game against one of these ships and your hit chance was a lot lower than you thought it was going to be in the firing round. Well, there's a good chance some of these defensive systems might have had a part to play in that. Okay, so enjoy your games, and I'll catch you later.